You're not cold, you're not broken. There's a reason you don't like having visitors. And it's not about being antisocial, it's about energy. When the mind is still, the guest must be chosen. Not every knock deserves an answer. Not every presence is meant for your space. This isn't about being antisocial, this is about protection, spiritual protection. In the Shaolin temple, we train in silence before we train in form. Not because silence is pleasant, but because it's necessary. Silence exposes the noise inside you, and if you want to master yourself, you must first face that noise without running. Most people don't realize this. True solitude is not emptiness, it is preparation. Every moment you choose quiet over chaos, your soul sharpens. If you've started pulling away from visitors, if you feel a quiet resistance to casual company, that's not a flaw, that's a sign that something deeper is waking up inside you. A calling to retreat, not because you're hiding, but because your spirit is clearing the space for something real. In this video, I will explain why that feeling matters. Why your dislike for visitors might be the very thing protecting your transformation, and how ancient Shaolin wisdom views this impulse not as avoidance but as awakening. By the end, you will understand what this reveals about your soul, and why honoring it may be the most powerful decision you ever make. Welcome to Shaolin Soulfire. If you walk this path with us, subscribe now, because this is where the real training begins. Some doors are not meant to open for everyone. When I was a young monk sweeping the temple grounds, my master once said, "It's not the walls that make this temple sacred, it's the silence we protect and the eyes we allow to witness it." I didn't understand it then, but over time, I began to feel the weight of those words. The Shaolin temple is not busy, it's deliberate. Every step, every sound, every presence is chosen. Visitors don't simply enter, they are received. If someone walks through the gate without inner respect, their energy lingers long after they've gone. The space remembers, and so do we. When you feel uneasy having people in your home, or even in your energy, it's not always about personality, it's about frequency. You are sensing something that words don't explain, a tension in the air, a shift in your body, an inner guard rising, even when the face before you is smiling. The more still you become, the more disruption you notice. Some visitors bring questions, anxiety, scattered thoughts. They don't mean harm, but they carry noise, and noise has a cost. It stirs up the waters you've worked hard to calm. Not all energy belongs in your temple. Not every knock must be answered. Your discomfort may be wisdom in disguise. In the old training halls of the temple, before the first movement was taught, the space was stilled. Doors closed. Voices lowered. No one rushed. Even the air felt slower. Why? Because a noisy room reflects a noisy mind, and a noisy mind cannot receive truth. Shaolin wisdom is simple, but not easy. To still the mind, first still the room. That means your surroundings matter. The shape of your day matters. The people who enter your space matter deeply. Visitors carry energy, not just footsteps and stories, but expectations, unspoken emotions, distractions. They bring movement, conversation, shifting dynamics, all of which stir the waters inside you, sometimes gently, sometimes like a storm. When your soul says, "Not now, listen," that isn't fear, it isn't rudeness, it's refinement. Something in you has started protecting the soil where your inner work is growing. You can feel how easy it is to be pulled off course, how quickly peace can evaporate. Inner mastery demands outer discipline. The monks would rise before dawn, not just to train the body, but to train the space itself. Sweep the floor, light the incense, clean the mind. That level of care was never random, it was ritual. A way of saying, this moment matters. So when you start to crave stillness fiercely, it means something is awakening, something delicate, not yet ready to be handled by the outside world. Protecting that is not selfish, it's sacred. Stillness, like fire, needs shelter. Otherwise, it flickers and dies. There are moments in life when everything in you turns inward. The noise outside becomes too sharp. Conversations feel heavy. Even kind people feel like too much. And so, without needing to explain it, you close the doors. This isn't set coldness. It sets rhythm. Just as the earth has seasons, so does the soul. There are times to bloom and times to break, times to speak and times to stay silent. In Shaolin practice, this cycle is honored. We don't force openness. We observe, we adjust, we listen for what the moment requires. During periods of inner change, something subtle happens. You begin shedding old identities, beliefs, attachments. The surface looks quiet, even distant, but inside, the spirit is reordering itself. The chaos of transformation can't survive in an open, unguarded space, so the doors close, gently but firmly. Some people won't understand. They'll think you're pulling away, but it's not rejection, it's refinement. You are not hiding, you are becoming, and becoming takes stillness. In the temple, there were times when a monk would spend weeks without speaking to anyone, not out of punishment, but preparation. A silence chosen not by rule, but by need. That silence became the cocoon for something new. The truth is, not liking visitors might just be a sign that you're entering sacred territory, that your inner world is shifting, growing, shedding the excess, and once the transformation passes, the door may open again. But when it does, you'll know exactly who belongs inside and who doesn't. The season of containment doesn't last forever, but it exists for a reason. Let it do its work. When the mind grows quiet, the world grows loud. Not in volume, but in feeling. A single word can carry weight. A glance can speak volumes. The spaces between moments become more alive than the moments themselves. This is what happens when you begin to awaken. Shaolin monks are trained to sense beyond the surface. Not just what is said, but how it is said. The tension behind a smile. The unrest hiding in a loud voice. The hesitation before a handshake. Every interaction becomes a study in energy. At first, it's overwhelming. The more awake you become, the more you feel. Rooms that once felt normal now feel chaotic. Conversations that once passed easily now seem filled with static. You walk into a gathering, and something in your chest tightens, not because of fear, but because you can feel the pull of scattered minds. Others may not understand. They'll say you've changed, that you're distant, closed off. But what they call antisocial is actually attunement. You are not withdrawing from people, you are becoming precise with your presence. You are listening more deeply than words. This awareness is not taught through books. It's sharpened through silence, repetition, and discipline. In the temple, monks would sit for hours without speaking, simply feeling the energy of the space and the people within it. Over time, they could sense a lie before it was spoken, or feel peace in a person without a single word exchanged. This level of sensitivity isn't that weakness. It's that mastery. To know when to stay, when to speak, when to leave. To choose peace over performance. To honor your system when it says, this is too much. In the monastery, silence was more than discipline. It was protection. Every word we spoke had weight. Not because we were afraid to speak, but because we were trained to feel the cost of unnecessary talk. Every careless sentence was seen as a small leak in the vessel of presence. Drop by drop, energy drained, focus scattered. That's why silence was golden. Not to suppress expression, but to conserve power. A quiet room holds strength. A quiet mind holds clarity. In the world outside, conversation is constant, but much of it moves in circles, words spoken just to fill the air. Small talk, gossip, complaints. These may seem harmless on the surface, but if you're walking a path of inner mastery, they start to feel different, heavier, louder, less welcome. You might find yourself pulling away, not out of judgment but fatigue. Your soul begins to resist surface-level noise. You sit across from someone who speaks endlessly, and part of you is already retreating, not out of disrespect, but because you can feel your energy thinning with every word. This isn't social anxiety, it's spiritual alignment. You're no longer willing to trade your stillness for stimulation. What you crave now is depth, truth, presence. A single honest silence becomes more nourishing than an hour of empty talk. Monks were taught to speak only when the words could stand beside silence without shrinking. That standard may seem extreme, but for those walking the inward path, it begins to make perfect sense. If your soul no longer welcomes casual visitors, it may be because your spirit is calling for conversations that don't leak but build, not noise but nourishment, not company but connection. Every morning in the temple began with a broom, long before meditation, before chanting, before any training. The floor was swept in silence, not hurried, not mechanical, but with presence. Each stroke was deliberate, like breathing. Dust was cleared, yes, but so was the residue of thought, tension, and yesterday's weight. This wasn't about cleanliness, it was about clarity. Shaolin monks believed the outer world mirrors the inner. A cluttered space clouds the mind. A clean space invites stillness. When the floor is swept, something subtle opens. An invisible calm settles into the room. It becomes easier to sit, to breathe, to listen. This is why the daily sweep matters. Not just as a task, but as a ritual. And perhaps your own soul has begun sweeping too, quietly, gently, clearing space inside you that feels too fragile for interruption. Maybe that's why the thought of visitors now feels invasive. Not because you dislike them, but because your inner clarity is delicate, recently earned, hard-won. When you begin doing real inner work, when your thoughts sharpen, your spirit deepens, your nervous system starts craving order, simplicity, silence. The presence of another, no matter how kind, can stir the waters. Their stories, their energy, their movement, it can be too much. And so the soul says no, not now. This isn't selfish, it's sacred maintenance. Like sweeping the floor to welcome the day, you are protecting a new kind of awareness, one that doesn't thrive in chaos or clutter, one that needs space. People often misunderstand martial arts. They think it's all about power, kicks, strikes, domination. But those who've walked the true path know the greatest force comes from what isn't there. From the space, the stillness, the pause between movements. Real mastery isn't about controlling others. It's about controlling your own energy, your timing, your response. In that way, martial arts becomes a form of listening to yourself, to your environment, to the invisible rhythm behind the visible world. That sits where flow begins. Emptiness in this sense is not a void. It's readiness. It's the place where everything can happen because nothing is yet fixed. In Shaolin training, we were taught to hold postures, not to look strong, but to create inner space. A container for awareness, still body, moving mind. And that same principle applies off the mat. When you say no to visitors, when you choose quiet over company, you're not closing yourself off. You're holding space, not out of fear, but for something higher to enter. Insight doesn't shout. It arrives in whispers. Peace doesn't compete. It waits for your invitation. Higher thoughts don't rush in through open doors. They descend into stillness. The space you protect by staying alone isn't empty. It's charged, alive. You are preparing yourself to receive something finer than noise, something that only visits those who are willing to make room. The world may never understand this. They'll see the silence and call it lack. But those walking the path of discipline know better. What looks like rejection is often reverence. You're not pushing people away. You're bowing to what's trying to enter from within. And that can only arrive when the space is clean, open, and unoccupied. It takes strength to lift a heavy weight, but it takes deeper strength to set one down and walk away. In Shaolin training, restraint is not weakness, it's wisdom. We learn not just how to move, but when not to move, when to remain still, when to stay silent, when to say no, and perhaps most difficult of all, how to say it without guilt. Modern life teaches the opposite. Say yes to everything. Be available. Be agreeable. Smile when you're tired. Speak when you'd rather breathe. But that kind of living scatters your spirit. It keeps you loyal to others, but disloyal to yourself. Shaolin practice is about alignment, not obligation. If your energy says no, that is the answer. Not from pride, not from rudeness, from clarity. To choose peace over pleasing others, this is inner mastery. You don't owe your presence to every event, every request, every conversation. Your time, your energy, your attention, these are sacred. They should be offered, not extracted. When you withhold them, you're not being selfish, you're being precise. There were monks in the temple who rarely spoke, not because they had nothing to say, but because their silence carried more truth than most words. They knew the value of conserving their presence, of not spending it just to meet expectations. In the same way, your quiet life is not a failure of participation. It's a sign of devotion. You're not withdrawing from the world, you're realigning with yourself. That's not lesser, it's cleaner, more focused, more true. To live without guilt for choosing your path is rare. But once you taste it, there's no turning back, because you'll realize peace isn't something you find, it's something you defend. Sometimes the discomfort you feel when someone enters your space isn't personal. It's not about the person, their mood, or their intention. It's about timing. It's about what's quietly unfolding within you. There are moments in life when something rare begins to stir. Not loud, not dramatic, just a subtle shift. A quiet call inward. A pull towards stillness you can't explain. You start craving silence, not as an escape, but as a homecoming. The outside world doesn't feel wrong, it just feels irrelevant. In these moments, even the kindest visitor can feel like a distraction, not because they mean harm, but because your spirit is trying to deepen, and anything that pulls your attention outward feels like interference. Spiritual growth, when it's real, doesn't begin with expansion, it begins with retreat. The outer world pauses, the inner world takes over, your senses draw inward. You listen more, you speak less, you notice your breath, your thoughts, the way emotions rise and fall without warning, until you've met yourself fully. Without noise, without mirrors, you haven't truly awakened. Visitors, conversations, obligations, they keep you orbiting the surface. But this work calls for something deeper. Solitude becomes the dojo, the cave, the temple. And so, if your threshold has become harder to cross, honor that. The discomfort isn't always a signal to open the door. Sometimes it's the gate closing behind you, so something holy can begin. Once you've met your true self, you'll know when and how to re-emerge, but not before. So let this be your reminder. There is nothing wrong with needing space. In fact, it may be the clearest sign that something right is finally taking shape within you. The more you grow, the more you feel what supports your peace and what disturbs it. That feeling is not a problem to fix, it's a compass to follow. Shaolin wisdom teaches us to listen before we speak, to observe before we act, and to clear the space before welcoming anything in. That same discipline applies to your life. Guard your attention, respect your silence, choose who and what you let into your sacred field. You don't need permission to protect your energy. You don't need to explain your quiet. If your soul is calling you inward, trust it. That's where the real transformation happens, not in the noise but in the stillness behind it. As you move through your day, remember saying no can be a form of deep respect for yourself, your path, and the unseen work unfolding within you. Thank you for walking this path with us. If this message brought you clarity or comfort, we invite you to like the video and subscribe to our channel, Shaolin Soulfire. Until next time, stay present, stay empty, stay true.